But I felt in my gut that this was only the prelude. Heinz was bored. The routine of morning inspections was no longer enough for him. He was looking for something deeper, more intimate. He was looking to see what was hidden under the skin. The next day, during roll call, the 5 women were not there. Their places in the ranks were empty, like missing teeth in a jaw. No one dared ask questions. Silence was our only armor. But around noon, while we were carrying stones under the gaze of the guards, I saw the infirmary door open. A stretcher came out. It was covered with a white sheet, but the wind lifted a corner of the fabric. I'm not sure what I saw. It was a leg, but it no longer looked like a human leg. It was bandaged, deformed, as if someone had tried to resculpt it. I looked away, bile rising to my lips. I understood then that the 16 centimeters were not just a rule of modesty or discipline. It was a measure of access. It was the zone that Heinz had reserved the right to control, to modify, to destroy. Our legs had become his canvas, and he was beginning to paint his masterpiece of horror. I swore to myself that day that I would not let him take me, that I would hide my wound, that I would walk straight, even if the bone of my leg broke. I started stealing scraps of paper from the trash cans of the administrative office where I sometimes cleaned the floor. I chewed them to make a paste that I applied to my wound to mask it, then covered it with dust so it would blend in with my dirty skin. It was derisory, pathetic, but it was my act of resistance. Every morning, I presented my 16 centimeters of bare flesh for inspection, breath held, praying that his eagle eye would not spot the deception. I was gambling my life on a coin toss every day, every hour. But I didn't know that the real danger did not come from my injured leg. The real danger came from a rumor starting to circulate in the camp, a rumor concerning a new directive from Berlin, a directive that would give Heinz absolute power over our very fertility. And this rumor bore a terrifying codename that we barely whispered in the dark, the Purity Protocol. It's strange how memory works. I don't remember the face of the soldier who pushed me into the train, but I remember the texture of the wooden floor against my cheek. I remember the sound of the wheels on the rails, a hypnotic rhythm that punctuated our descent into hell. Tick-tack, tick-tack, tick-tack. Every kilometer took us further from civilization and closer to a world where moral rules no longer existed. We traveled for 3 days, without water, without light, packed together like cattle. At first, there were tears, prayers, names screamed in the darkness. Then silence set in, a heavy, thick silence, the silence of understanding. We knew, without needing to say it, that we were no longer French citizens. We had become cargo. When the doors finally opened, the air was not fresh. It was heavy with ash, a gray, greasy dust that stuck to the skin and penetrated the pores. We had arrived. This story, that of Noémie and the thousands of women whose voices were erased, is reconstructed here with an absolute concern for historical and emotional truth. To support this work of memory and allow other forgotten stories to come to light, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Tell us in the comments from which city or country you are listening to this testimony today. Your presence is what keeps this history alive. The camp was not the chaos I had imagined. It was worse. It was a factory. Everything was ordered, aligned, symmetrical. They made us get down. They sorted us. That is when I saw Heinz for the first time. He did not look like the monster from propaganda caricatures. His face wasn't twisted with hatred. On the contrary, he possessed an icy elegance, his uniform impeccably tailored, his polished boots reflecting the gray sky. He observed us not with disgust, but with a scientific curiosity, like an entomologist observing insects he is about to pin to a corkboard. He did not shout, he almost whispered, and it was that softness that was terrifying. He lined us up in the central courtyard under a fine rain and spoke the words that would define our existence for the next 2 years. He said that discipline was the highest form of civilization. He said that to re-educate us, we had to be taught precision. Then he took an object out of his pocket, a simple wooden ruler. Not a weapon, not a whip, a schoolchild's ruler, graduated with black markings. He held it up so we could all see it. 16 centimeters, he announced. This is the limit. It is the border between order and chaos. We didn't understand yet. We were naked, shivering with cold, our shorn hair lying on the muddy ground around us. They threw clothes at us, gray, coarse, poorly cut skirts. But they had all been altered. They were short. Too short for winter, too short for decency, too short to allow us to feel human. Heinz explained the rule with disconcerting calm. No skirt was to hang lower than 16 centimeters above the knee. It wasn't a question of saving fabric. It was a question of visibility. He wanted to see. He wanted us to know that he was watching. The first night was the longest of my life. We were packed onto wooden bunks. No mattresses, no blankets, only those ridiculous skirts and thin shirts. The cold was a physical bite, a beast gnawing at toes and fingers. But worse than the cold was the posture. We could not curl up freely. The female guards passed by with lanterns, checking that the rule was respected even in our sleep. If we pulled the fabric to cover our frostbitten legs, it was an act of rebellion. I spent the night motionless, my muscles tetanized, my eyes wide open, staring at the planks of the bed above me. I listened to the irregular breathing, the muffled sobs, and the sound of boots pacing back and forth. I said to myself, "This isn't possible. This can't be what war is. You can't die of shame." I was wrong. Shame is a slow poison, much more effective than hunger. The next morning at dawn, the roll call began. We had to stand at attention in the courtyard, motionless for hours. The wind whipped our bare legs. The skin turned marbled with purple and red. Highness passed through the ranks. He didn't look at our faces. He didn't look at our eyes. He looked at our legs. He held his ruler in his hand, tapping it gently against his thigh. Tuck, tuck, tuck. This rhythm became the metronome of our terror. He would stop, sometimes in front of a woman, seemingly at random. He would crouch down. He would place the ruler against the skin, measuring the distance between the knee and the frayed hem. The contact of cold wood against flesh, the breath of the man on the skin. It was a violation without penetration, a psychic rape repeated before hundreds of helpless witnesses. If the measurement was not exact, if the fabric had slipped down by a millimeter, he didn't scream. He simply made a gesture with his hand, and the woman disappeared. I remember Elise. She was 19. She was from Lyon. She was shy, the kind of girl who blushed when a boy spoke to her. She had tried to sew a piece of rag to the bottom of her skirt to gain a few centimeters of warmth. It was clumsy, coarse stitches made with a makeshift needle. During the inspection, Heinz stopped in front of her. He saw the modification. He didn't tear the fabric away. He smiled. He placed his gloved hand on Elisa's shoulder and asked her softly if she was cold. She nodded, trembling, with tears in her eyes. "Warmth must be earned," he whispered. He ordered her to remain standing in the center of the courtyard while we left for forced labor. When we returned that evening, she was still there. She had fallen into the snow, blue, inert. The ruler was placed on her body like a signature. That night, I understood that we were not there to work. We were there to be broken. And I knew my turn would inevitably come, because my skirt seemed to shrink a little more every day from the rain and washing. I felt Heinz's gaze on me, calculating, patient. He was waiting for the moment I would make a mistake. But what I didn't know yet was that Heinz's cruelty had no limit, and the 16 centimeters were only the beginning of a much darker experiment he was preparing in the secrecy of the infirmary. If you ask me what fear smells like, I won't tell you it smells of sweat or urine, as one often reads in cheap novels. No, in Block 4, fear had a mineral, almost metallic smell. It smelled of chalk, soiled snow, and damp fabric that never dries. The winter of 1944 settled in not as a season, but as an additional guard, even more cruel than the armed men on the watchtowers. The cold became a living entity, a presence that crept under our nails and into the marrow of our bones, turning every movement into a trial of will.
"Do you think I don't see?" he whispered. His voice was soft, fatherly, terrifying. "Do you think you can manipulate reality with a piece of cloth?" He took a step back and took out the ruler. The gesture was slow, theatrical. The sound of wood clicking against his gloved palm echoed in the absolute silence of the courtyard. Tack. He placed the instrument on Adele's leg. The measurement was wrong. The skirt was too low. According to his logic, she had stolen 16 centimeters of visibility from the Reich. "Dishonesty," he declared, addressing all of us without taking his eyes off Adele, is a disease. And like all diseases, it must be purged. He didn't hit Adele. He didn't order the guards to take her away. He did worse. He ordered Adele to hold the ruler herself against her own leg, and to stay like that, arm outstretched, posture rigid, until her muscles gave way. We had to leave her work, leaving her there, alone in the middle of the roll call square, a living statue of submission. When we returned in the evening, 12 hours later, she was no longer there. The ruler was lying on the ground, broken in two. Adele never returned to Barrack 4. We learned later that she had been transferred to the infirmary, that place we feared more than death itself. Because the infirmary was not a place of healing, it was the antechamber of disappearance. It was from that day on that the atmosphere in the barrack changed. A toxic mistrust settled between us. Heinz had succeeded in his masterstroke. He had turned us against each other without uttering a single explicit threat. We began to watch each other. "Your skirt is too long," one would whisper. "You're going to get us punished," another hissed. Solidarity, that fragile bond that allowed us to hold on, frayed under the pressure of those 16 centimeters. I saw long-standing friendships break over a poorly sewn hem. I saw women denounce their bed neighbors for trying to mend a hole, hoping thereby to gain the invisible favors of the executioner. We had become the guards of our own prison. I remember a night when I couldn't sleep. I was lying there, eyes open in the dark, listening to the snoring and groaning of my comrades. I felt dirty, not from the grime, but with a moral filth. I had spent the day checking my own outfit with a morbid obsession, internalizing Heinz's days until it became my own conscience. I disgusted myself. I was 23 years old. I loved Rilke and the music of Debussy. And yet, my mental universe had been reduced to the length of a piece of gray wool. That was the enemy's true victory, colonizing our minds before even destroying our bodies.
But horror, as I learned, has floors. You think you've hit bottom, and then you discover there's a cellar underneath. The next phase of escalation did not take place in the courtyard, but inside our quarters. It was a February evening. The snowstorm was making the walls of the barrack shake. We were huddled together, trying to keep the little warmth accumulated during the day. Suddenly, the door burst open with violence. The icy wind rushed in, blowing out the few candles we had managed to light. In the doorframe, silhouetted against the blinding whiteness of the outside, stood Heinz. He was not alone. He was accompanied by 2 doctors in white coats, carrying leather briefcases. This was not a disciplinary inspection. It was something else, something more clinical, more intrusive. "Light," barked one of the guards. The electric lamp sputtered and flooded the room with a harsh yellow light, revealing our misery in all its ugliness. We jumped from our bunks, standing at attention at the foot of the beds, trembling, our nightgowns protecting us from nothing. Heinz walked slowly along the central aisle. He didn't look at our skirts this time. He looked at our bare legs, at our skin. He stopped in front of me. My heart stopped. He pointed his ruler toward my left shin. There was a small wound there, a scrape I had gotten while working in the stone quarry. It was infected, red, pulsing. "Interesting," he said, turning to one of the doctors. "Note this, subject 784, tissue resistance compromised, progression of necrosis to be monitored." The doctor nodded and scribbled something on a notepad. I felt like a circus animal, a biological curiosity. He didn't see my pain, he saw data. Heinz moved even closer. He raised his ruler, not to hit me, but to trace an imaginary line on my skin from the knee to the ankle. The wood was cold, so cold it burned. "Do you know," he whispered, using my serial number as if it were my only name, "that beauty resides in symmetry, and that disease is in asymmetry. Your leg, it offends the natural order." That night they selected 5 women, not the weakest nor the sickest. They chose those who had the most interesting legs, according to Heinz's obscure criteria. Women with varicose veins, with scars, with birthmarks. They were taken to the infirmary, escorted by the silent doctors. We didn't know what was going to happen to them. We could only imagine. And imagination in a place like that is worse than reality. I spent the rest of the night rubbing my leg, trying to erase the ghost sensation of the ruler on my skin, trying to clean the stain of his attention.
But I felt in my gut that this was only the prelude. Heinz was bored. The routine of morning inspections was no longer enough for him. He was looking for something deeper, more intimate. He was looking to see what was hidden under the skin. The next day, during roll call, the 5 women were not there. Their places in the ranks were empty, like missing teeth in a jaw. No one dared ask questions. Silence was our only armor. But around noon, while we were carrying stones under the gaze of the guards, I saw the infirmary door open. A stretcher came out. It was covered with a white sheet, but the wind lifted a corner of the fabric. I'm not sure what I saw. It was a leg, but it no longer looked like a human leg. It was bandaged, deformed, as if someone had tried to resculpt it. I looked away, bile rising to my lips. I understood then that the 16 centimeters were not just a rule of modesty or discipline. It was a measure of access. It was the zone that Heinz had reserved the right to control, to modify, to destroy. Our legs had become his canvas, and he was beginning to paint his masterpiece of horror. I swore to myself that day that I would not let him take me, that I would hide my wound, that I would walk straight, even if the bone of my leg broke. I started stealing scraps of paper from the trash cans of the administrative office where I sometimes cleaned the floor. I chewed them to make a paste that I applied to my wound to mask it, then covered it with dust so it would blend in with my dirty skin. It was derisory, pathetic, but it was my act of resistance. Every morning, I presented my 16 centimeters of bare flesh for inspection, breath held, praying that his eagle eye would not spot the deception. I was gambling my life on a coin toss every day, every hour. But I didn't know that the real danger did not come from my injured leg. The real danger came from a rumor starting to circulate in the camp, a rumor concerning a new directive from Berlin, a directive that would give Heinz absolute power over our very fertility. And this rumor bore a terrifying codename that we barely whispered in the dark, the Purity Protocol. They often say that hope keeps you alive. That's false. In a camp, hope is a useless calorie that the body burns in vain. What keeps you alive is hatred. It's a cold, hard ember, lodged somewhere between the stomach and the heart, that keeps you standing when your muscles have long since surrendered. By the spring of 1944, I lived only through that hatred. It was directed entirely toward that immaculate white door that marked the entrance to the infirmary. Unlike the rest of the camp, made of rotting wood and black mud, the infirmary shone. It was obscenely clean. The windows were washed. You could sometimes see silhouettes in white moving through the panes with a reassuring, almost divine slowness. But we all knew that this building was not a place of healing. It was the belly of the beast. And the rumor of the Purity Protocol was no longer a rumor. It had become a list. Every morning after roll call, an officer read out serial numbers. Those who were called did not go to forced labor. They marched toward the white door. Some returned a few days later, their gaze empty, walking with a strange stiffness, as if their hips had been welded. Others never returned. My turn came on a Thursday in April. The sky was an insolent blue, dotted with small cottony clouds that reminded me of afternoons on the banks of the Seine. When my number, 784, was called, the world went silent. I didn't hear the birds. I didn't hear the wind. I heard only the blood roaring in my ears, a slow sound of surf that drowned everything. My comrades instinctively moved away, creating a void around me, as if I were already contagious, already marked by death. I didn't cry. I moved forward. I crossed the courtyard, feeling the thousands of gazes fixed on my back. It was the longest walk of my life. Every step took me further from the world of the living and closer to that of the shadows. Arriving at the white door, a smell hit me. Not the smell of death, no. The smell of ether and phenolic soap, a clean, surgical smell that stung the nostrils and made the eyes water. It was the smell of civilization diverted from its primary function to serve barbarism.
Inside, the contrast was blinding. After months spent in the filthy dimness of the barracks, the neon lights hurt my retinas. Everything was tiled in white. The floor shone. There was no dust. A hushed silence reigned, broken only by the clicking of metal instruments
and the sound of muffled footsteps on linoleum. I was ordered to undress, not with the usual brutality of the guards, but with clinical indifference. A nurse, a woman with a severe face and cold hands, took my ragged clothes and placed them in a wicker basket, as if they were ordinary dirty laundry. I found myself naked in the center of the room, shivering under the harsh light. Then the back door opened. Heinz entered. He was not wearing his gray-green military uniform. He wore an immaculate white coat, buttoned to the neck. Without his insignia, without his skull and crossbones cap, he looked like any family doctor, any university professor. That was the most terrifying thing, his normality. He held his black notebook as always. He approached me, looked into my eyes with that empty curiosity that froze my blood. "Number 784, he said softly. "Subject with high resistance potential. We shall see if the hypothesis is confirmed." He signaled me to lie down on the examination table. The leather was icy against my back. He strapped me down, thick leather straps at the wrists and ankles. I didn't struggle. I was in shock. My mind had detached from my body and was floating somewhere at the ceiling, observing the scene like a helpless spectator. It was then that he took out the ruler, the same wooden ruler he used in the courtyard. But here, in this temple of perverted science, it took on another meaning. He placed it on my left thigh. He took a pen with violet ink. With meticulous precision, he traced a line on my skin, exactly 16 centimeters above my knee. Then he traced another line higher, near the groin. He delimited a rectangle of flesh. "You've always wondered why 16 centimeters, he whispered, as if confiding an intimate secret. He was preparing a syringe, drawing a clear liquid from a glass vial. "It's not about modesty, Noemi. It's about architecture. It is in this precise zone that the major lymphatic and muscular networks are located. It is here that the strength for walking resides. If we control this zone, we control movement. We control escape."
He wasn't talking about killing. He was talking about paralyzing, about modifying. I understood then the horror of what he was doing to the other women. He wasn't trying to treat wounds. He was testing chemical agents, neurotoxic poisons, directly in the muscles that allowed us to stand. He was trying to create a human body that would be alive, conscious, but incapable of revolt, incapable of running. A perfect biological slave. The purity he spoke of was not racial, it was functional. A pure body was a body that obeyed without the mind being able to intervene. He brought the needle toward the area marked in violet ink. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, paralyzed by terror. I closed my eyes. I felt the sting. Not a sharp pain, but a cold, deep burn that spread instantly through my thigh like snake venom. "Count backward from 10, he ordered. 10. I felt the cold rising. My leg no longer belonged to me. It was becoming heavy, dense like stone. 9. The cold reached my hip. Violent nausea overwhelmed me. The ceiling lights began to spin, creating pulsing halos. I heard a strange noise, a sawing sound, an electric hum coming from the next room. I turned my head, fighting the drug envoting my brain. The door was ajar. I saw, my God, I saw what was in there. On another table, there was a woman. I couldn't see her face, but I saw her legs. They were open, exposed, and the skin of her thighs had been removed like a glove turned inside out. You could see the muscles, red, vivid, throbbing. Another doctor was working on them, not to sew them back together, but to insert something. Fragments of glass, wood. I didn't know. I just saw that he was turning a woman into a puzzle of flesh and pain. 7, I screamed, a raucous animal cry that tore my throat. Heinz sighed, annoyed, as if I had interrupted a classical music concert. He placed his gloved hand over my mouth. The smell of latex suffocated me. "Hush," he whispered. "Pain is information. Do not waste it by screaming. Analyze it. Become a witness to your own sacrifice." The drug finally took over. Darkness flooded my vision, starting from the edges, until only a narrow tunnel remained, fixed on Heinz's gray eyes. I felt him pick up the ruler again. I felt him measure the depth of the incision he was about to make. The last thing I remember before sinking into unconsciousness was his calm, didactic voice explaining to the nurse. Note the reaction. The subject shows higher than average nerve resistance. We will be able to increase the dose.
I woke up hours or perhaps days later. I was lying on a straw mattress in a crowded recovery room. The smell of blood and pus was unbearable. I tried to move my left leg. Nothing. It was there. I could see it wrapped in thick bandages stained with yellowish fluids, but I could no longer feel it. It was a dead weight attached to my body. I panicked. I touched the bandage frantically. Under the layers of gauze, I felt the shape, the scar. It was long, straight, perfectly geometric. It measured exactly 16 centimeters. He had marked me. I had become one of his works. Around me, in the gloom, I heard groans. "My legs, I can't feel my legs," voices whispered in the dark. We were the legion of the broken, the guinea pigs of Block 11. But what Heinz didn't know, what his cold science hadn't foreseen, is that paralysis of the body sometimes awakens an unknown strength in the spirit. Lying there, unable to get up, feeling the fire of infection beginning to burn under the bandages, I made a decision. I would not die here. I would not give him that satisfaction. He had taken my muscles. He had taken my ability to run. But he had made a fatal error. He had left me alive with my memory, and I was going to use that memory as a weapon. I looked at the cracked ceiling of the infirmary and made a vow that if I got out of here, every centimeter of scar on my body would become a line in his indictment. But to get out, I first had to survive the night. And that night, as the fever rose and delusions began to dance before my eyes, I heard the heavy footsteps of soldiers approaching. They weren't coming for an inspection. They were coming with bags, human-sized black bags. The experiment was over for some of us, and the cleanup was beginning. The end of the world did not arrive with celestial trumpets or the silence of death. It arrived with a smell, the smell of burning paper. It was January 1945. From my straw pallet in the infirmary, unable to walk without screaming in pain, I smelled that acrid smoke flooding the corridors. The Germans were burning the archives. They were burning the lists, the medical reports, the black notebooks where Heinz had recorded our agonies with such detail. It was panic. For the first time, I heard not the sharp click of boots marching in step, but the disorganized sound of running. Orders shouted, engines coughing in the cold, sporadic gunshots. They were erasing the evidence. And we, the women of Block 4, we were the... Fear changed sides that day, but it did not leave us. We knew the Nazi logic preferred to leave no witnesses. I crawled out of my bed. My left leg was a block of lead, insensible yet burning with phantom pain. I dragged myself to the frosted window. Outside, the snow was gray with ash. I saw Heinz one last time. He was no longer wearing his white coat. He had put back on his gray coat, collar turned up. He was carrying a suitcase. He wasn't running. He walked toward a black car, calm and methodical to the end. He didn't look toward the infirmary. He didn't look at his works. He got into the car and disappeared into the white fog. He took with him our names, our measurements, and the science of our destruction. When the Russian tanks smashed through the barbed wire 2 days later, I didn't feel joy. It's a terrible thing to say, I know. One expects scenes of jubilation, hugs, flowers thrown on the armored vehicles. But when you have been reduced to the state of an object for 2 years, you don't become human again in a second. I looked at those foreign soldiers, with their eyes wide with horror, as they discovered our living skeletons, and I felt only an immense fatigue. A young soldier approached me. He cried. He reached out a gloved hand to help me up. I tried. I put my weight on my left leg, and I collapsed. My leg gave way under me like broken glass. Heinz's treatment had worked. He had destroyed the deep muscular structure. Even free, I could no longer stand without help. I was free, but I was broken. That was his last victory, his last silent laugh. I would walk out of this camp, but I would never again walk like a free woman.
I would always walk with the stiffness of a prisoner. Returning to Paris was another kind of hell. I was welcomed at the Gare de l'Est as a heroine, but I felt like a ghost. My family was waiting for me. My mother, aged 10 years in my absence, screamed when she saw my condition. She wanted to hold me, feed me, wash me. She wanted to erase the camp. But you don't erase the camp. The camp was in me. It was in my nightmares, where the tack-tack-tack of the ruler woke me every night. It was in my relationship with food, which I hid under my pillow by reflex. And above all, it was engraved on my thigh.
The Parisian doctors examined my leg with perplexity. They had never seen such atrophy, such targeted necrosis. They saw the scar, 16 centimeters, a straight, white, pearly line crossing my skin like an impassable border. They asked me what it was. I lied. I said it was an accident, a fall on metal. How could I explain the truth to them? How could I tell them that a man had redesigned my anatomy to satisfy an obsession with control? The truth was too obscene for the world of the living, so I kept it to myself. I learned to walk with a cane. I learned to hide my leg under wide trousers or long skirts, well below the knee, always below the knee. The years passed. I saw the world change. I saw the reconstruction, the economic boom, the forgetting. I saw Heinz disappear from history, a name among many others who was never judged. Perhaps he became a respected doctor in West Germany, treating children, stroking blonde heads with those same hands that had injected me with poison. That thought made me insane. But the cruelest irony arrived in the 1960s, the sexual revolution. Suddenly, the women of Paris, the girls of my own generation and their children, began to liberate themselves, and the symbol of that freedom was the miniskirt. I walked the streets of Saint-Germain, leaning on my cane, and I saw thousands of young women revealing their legs, proud, carefree. They showed their thighs to the sun. They claimed the right to show their skin. For them, it was an act of rebellion, of joy. For me, it was a vision of horror. Every time I saw a hem rise above the knee, I saw the wooden ruler again. I saw the cold again. I saw the selection again. I wanted to scream at them. Cover yourselves. Don't give them that. Don't give them access. But I remained silent. I was an embittered old woman, a relic of a time everyone wanted to forget. I looked at my own legs in my bathroom mirror, alone, door locked. The scar was still there. It hadn't aged. It remained frozen in time, a monument of flesh to my dehumanization. 16 centimeters, the exact distance between their carefreeness and my eternal prison. I tried to have a normal life. I married. My husband was a good man, a former resistance fighter who had his own silences. He never asked me questions about the scar. He sometimes brushed it with his fingertips in the dark, with an infinite sadness, as one touches a sacred and cursed relic. But I could never have children. The purity protocol had not only affected my muscles, the injections had traveled further, deeper. Heinz had sterilized my future at the same time he paralyzed my walk. I was a genetic dead end. My lineage ended with me. That was the ultimate goal, wasn't it? Not only to kill us, but to prevent us from being mothers, from being creators. He had succeeded. I am an empty house, a library whose books have been burned. Today, I am 82 years old. My leg causes me pain every day. When the weather changes, when it rains, the scar pulls as if invisible stitches are tightening. It is my barometer. It is my daily reminder that the past is never truly past. I watch the news on television. I see modern wars. I see refugees, camps, barbed wire. And I wonder, what is their measurement? What is the new rule? Because there is always a rule. Evil changes its face, its uniform, its language, but it always needs to measure, to classify, to divide. It needs to turn the human into a number so it can destroy them without remorse. Heinz was not a monster from hell. He was a man who loved order, symmetry, and obedience. And men like him are everywhere, in offices, in governments, in hospitals. They are just waiting for the power to take out their rulers. I am tired now. Speaking of all this has exhausted me. I feel as if I have run a marathon with my dead leg. But I had to say it. Someone had to know that behind the great dates of history, behind the peace treaties and the global figures of victims, there are tiny, intimate, terrifying stories. There is the story of a wooden ruler and a gray skirt. There is the story of 16 centimeters. I will leave you with a thought.
just one. Tonight, when you return home, when you take off your clothes in complete safety in the warmth of your room, look at your body, look at your skin. It is the only thing that truly belongs to you. It is your last territory. But ask yourself this question and be honest. If tomorrow someone came to tell you that your dignity, your freedom, your right to live depended on a simple number imposed by another, how far would you let the ruler descend before saying no? At exactly which centimeter do you stop being human and become a slave?
I learned the answer too late. And you? The story of Noemi Clairvaux leaves us facing a deafening silence. What we have just heard is not only the account of physical survival, it is the autopsy of a system designed to crush the human soul through mathematical precision. Those 16 centimeters are not a simple war anecdote. They are the terrifying symbol of how quickly dignity can be taken from us when we cease to defend it. Noemi carried this scar alone for decades, but today, by listening to her voice, we share its weight. Memory is the only antidote against the repetition of history, and this memory is what you carry now. The mission of this channel is to exhume these buried truths, to give a voice to those whom history textbooks have reduced to mute statistics. Producing these documentaries required deep research and a total commitment to the truth. If this story touched you, if you believe it is essential not to let oblivion cover these destinies, we invite you to support our work. A simple like on this video, a subscription to the channel. It's not just an algorithmic click. It is an act of support, a way of saying, I will not forget, a way of ensuring these testimonies continue to exist. But your role doesn't stop there. History only lives if it is discussed, shared, felt. We would like to read your thoughts, your raw emotions after this journey to the end of the night. In the comments below, tell us what you feel facing this testimony. In a modern world where our freedoms seem guaranteed, what is for you the impassable limit? What is the rule you will never let anyone impose on you? Share your reflection with our community. Every comment is a stone added to the building of collective memory, proof that humanity, despite its scars, remains standing and vigilant. Thank you for listening until the end. Thank you for being among those who remember. See you soon for another story that time tried to erase.